There are nights that never really end. They just get buried deep under years of work and silence and the careful construction of a life that looks nothing like the one that broke you. I have one of those nights. I've carried it in my body for 20 years. Not as a wound. Not as a scar. As a fact. Hard and settled, like gravel under my feet at 9:40 at night, alone, watching the only car I knew disappear into the dark. I was 14 years old. My name is Corinne. I'm 34 now. And this is the story of the night my parents drove away and left me at a train station 3 hours from home, and the Sunday morning, 2 decades later, when they walked through my door expecting me to hand them a piece of myself. They expected a broken girl who'd never recovered. What they found was something they never prepared for. Before I go any further, if stories like this one speak to something you've carried quietly for years, take 1 second right now and subscribe. Hit the bell. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It belongs to every person who was ever told their pain was their own fault. Stay with me. This one goes deep. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the station. Not yet. To the car. We were 3 hours from home, coming back from a cousin's wedding. My parents in the front seat. Me in the back. I was 14, restless, and honest in the way teenagers are honest when they haven't yet learned that honesty costs something. My mother said something. I don't even remember the exact words. What I remember is the eye roll that left my face before I could catch it, and the quiet murmur that followed. Something like, "She always has to make everything about her." I said it low. I thought I said it low. The car went quiet the way it always did before a storm. My mother turned and looked out the passenger window. No words. Just that silence of hers that could fill a room like smoke. My father kept his eyes on the road. Both hands on the wheel. He always kept both hands on the wheel when things were about to go wrong. Like if he held on tight enough, he could steer around whatever was coming. He could never steer around her. 20 minutes later, she told him to pull off at the next station. I thought she needed a bathroom break. Maybe to walk and breathe and let the quiet settle. She didn't. She turned around in her seat and told me to get out. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it couldn't be real. She said it again. "Get out, Corinne. Take your bag." I had a duffel at my feet, packed for a weekend away. I grabbed it on instinct, the way you obey a voice that has been telling you what to do your entire life. I stepped out onto the gravel lot behind the station. The evening air had a cold in it, the kind that comes off iron rails and concrete. I stood there, bag at my feet, waiting for the doors to unlock again. The engine didn't cut. My mother cracked her window 2 inches and looked at me through the gap. Her voice was even, almost gentle. She said, "Let's see how she finds her way home." And the car pulled out slow, like they were running an errand. Like I was a package they decided not to deliver. I watched the taillights move across the gravel lot. I kept telling myself they'd circle back. They'd come around the other side of the building and there'd be a laugh and a lesson and a lecture about respect. The taillights got smaller. Then there was nothing. Just me in the dark and the clock on the station wall ticking toward a night I had no plan for. Nobody came back. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because I couldn't sit with it for years. Nobody came back. Here is what I did. And I need you to hear this part clearly because my family spent 20 years rewriting it. I did everything right. I didn't wander off into the night. I didn't accept a ride from a stranger. I didn't fall apart on that gravel lot, even though every cell in my body wanted to. I picked up my bag and I walked into the station and I found the ticket window and I told the truth. The man behind the glass was named Harold. He was older, with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from spending decades watching people pass through places they don't mean to stay. The moment he looked at me, really looked at me, his expression shifted. He knew what he was seeing. A child who'd been left. I gave him my parents' names, the make of the car, the direction they'd driven. My voice was flat and small, the voice a person uses when they've used up all the bigger voices. Harold didn't doubt me. He didn't ask if I was sure. He picked up the phone and called the police, and he kept talking to me in a low, even way while we waited. The way you talk to someone you want to make sure doesn't disappear. A county deputy arrived within the hour. She crouched down to my eye level when she first approached me, which I have never forgotten. She had a small notebook. She wrote everything down. The wedding, the argument, the window, the line. She tried to reach my parents. She left a message identifying herself, stating that their daughter was in county custody and to call back immediately. Nobody called back. She made a note of that too. That report exists. It has a date, a time, a badge number, and a line that reads, "The responding officer was unable to reach the minor's parents." A later entry would note that when finally reached, the parents declined to return for the minor. I didn't understand yet how much that piece of paper would one day mean. I only knew that a stranger in a uniform had believed every word I said, while the people who raised me had driven off into the night. That's a thing you don't unlearn. The deputy was still with me when a woman walked in from across the lot, drying her hands on a kitchen apron. She'd seen the squad car lights through the front window of the diner she ran, right there on the edge of the station lot, like it had been placed there on purpose. Her name was Vera Dolan. She was maybe 60, with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair and a way of looking at a situation that was both sharp and completely calm. She listened as the deputy explained. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment, the kind of look that takes stock without making you feel like a problem to solve. Then she said I could sleep in the apartment over the diner. Just for the night. The deputy knew her. Trusted her. So that's where I went. Vera didn't make a fuss over me. She didn't treat me like something broken, which was the only reason I could bear to be there. She set me up on a cot. She brought me a glass of milk and a slice of apple pie still warm from that evening's close. She showed me where the bathroom was down the hall and told me to holler if I needed anything. That was it. No speeches. No pity. No long looks. In the morning, she handed me an apron. She said if I was going to eat her food, I was going to learn how to clear a table. Something in me just unknotted. Because work I understood. Earning my place, I understood. Owing nothing and being owed nothing, I understood. One night turned into a week. A week turned into the rest of my growing up. I learned later that Vera had lost her husband years before and never had children of her own. That the apartment above the diner had been empty for a long time before I fell into it. She never told me any of that herself. That was Vera. She didn't explain her kindnesses. She just committed them. Meanwhile, 3 hours away, my family was building a different story. A social worker named Ellen Marsh was assigned to my case. She drove out to the diner about 3 weeks after the night at the station, and she sat with me in a back booth with a thick file folder that already had pages in it. She told me she'd spoken to my parents. I asked what they said. She paused the way a decent person does before handing you something heavy. They told the county I'd run away. They told the neighbors, the church, everyone who asked, that I had always been wild, always been ungrateful, and that I'd disappeared after everything they'd sacrificed to give me a good life. She ran off ungrateful. That was the phrase my mother used. Ellen had it written in her notes because my mother said it to her face. I remember the vinyl booth going very still around me. The room, the afternoon light, the smell of coffee, all of it just narrowed to those 4 words. Ran off ungrateful. Not, we left her. Not, we didn't go back. Not, there is a deputy's report. Just a story with me as the villain and them as the heartbroken parents. Ellen asked if I wanted to go home. She had to ask. I said no. Without crying, without wavering, without a single moment of uncertainty. No. The county set up a legal arrangement with Vera. My parents signed the paperwork. They didn't fight. They didn't petition. They didn't call the diner. They wanted the version where I was the one who left. So I let them keep it. Ellen Marsh gave me her card on the way out and said, "If you ever need any of this, it's yours. It's your record." I put the card in a drawer and spent the next 20 years trying not to think about the town 3 hours away that had decided what kind of girl I was. I want to tell you about the years between 14 and 34, because people always want to skip to the confrontation. They want the scene at the end. But the scene at the end only means something if you understand what was built before it. The years from 14 to 18 were grease and homework. I bussed tables. Then I ran the dish station. Then Vera taught me the flat-top grill, standing beside me on Saturday mornings until my hands knew what to do without being told. By 16, I could run a full breakfast rush without dropping an order. I walked to school every morning and back to the diner every afternoon. I made the honor roll twice, mostly out of something hot and stubborn that I didn't have a name for yet. Later I would call it spite. Later I would call it survival. Later still I would just call it mine. I never called home. They never called the diner. When I turned 18, a letter came from the county saying the case was formally closed. No further action. That was the only acknowledgement from any official institution that what had happened to me had been real. 3 lines. Closed. No further action. I folded the letter and put it with the card in the drawer. I learned to need nobody. I want to be honest with you about what that costs. Because for a long time I framed it as strength. I built a self that couldn't be parked in a gravel lot. A self that asked for nothing, leaned on nothing, repaired everything alone at midnight rather than ask for help in the morning. Vera watched me do this for years. She only said one thing about it, just once, in the quiet of a Tuesday close. She said, "Corinne, leaning on someone isn't the same thing as being left." I didn't believe her. I'd been left. I knew exactly how easy it was. So I kept building walls and calling them independence. It worked. It also cost me. When I was 26, Vera offered to sell me a stake in the diner. Real terms. A real buyer. Not a gift, because that would have offended us both. I paid every month without missing. By 30, the whole thing was mine. The loan, the deed, the risk. All in my name. And then I went to work on what it could become. The diner had been a good, tired place. I made it a good, alive place. I kept every one of Vera's pie recipes exactly as she'd written them because some things you don't touch. But I redid the floors, opened up the back wall, added a Sunday brunch that drew people from 2 counties over. We went from 40 covers on a busy Saturday to 160. I hired a cook named Marcus who could have worked anywhere and stayed because I paid him fairly and listened when he had ideas. I hired a floor manager named Phyllis, a 50-year-old veteran of both the army and the restaurant business, who ran the dining room like a general who genuinely loved her soldiers. We expanded into the empty unit next door. Then again. The bell over the front door rang all day. I lived in the apartment upstairs, the same one where I'd slept on a cot at 14, except now it had my name on the deed and Vera's old reading chair by the window. Strangers who came in for the first time always said the same thing. They said it felt like home. They had no idea what that word had cost me, or how far I'd walked from a gravel lot to earn the right to make something that felt like the thing I'd never been given. I built it anyway. And that, right there, was the thing my family never predicted. I didn't just survive the lesson. I outgrew it. Vera died the winter I turned 33. Quietly. In her sleep. The way she would have wanted. The whole town came to the diner after the service because there was nowhere else that made sense. I cooked for 200 people that day and didn't sit down once because sitting down would have meant feeling it, and I wasn't ready to feel it. Her lawyer handed me an envelope and a small object wrapped in a kitchen towel. Inside the towel was a tin box. The kind that holds holiday shortbread. Dented at one corner. Sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age. There was a note rubber banded to the lid in Vera's slanted handwriting. It said, "For when you're ready. Not before." I was not ready. I put the tin on the high shelf in my apartment, behind the good dishes, and I left it there. Something old and careful in me understood that whatever was inside that box was about the gravel lot and the girl I'd been. And I had spent 20 years not touching that. The box sat on that shelf for the better part of a year. I grieved Vera by working. I kept her pies on the menu. I kept her chair by the window. I kept her habit of quietly comping the check when a young person came in looking like they needed one good thing to happen. But the box stayed shut. I told myself as long as it stayed shut, the past stayed where I'd left it. I should have known better. The past doesn't honor the deals you make with it alone. It only waits until you've built something worth coming back for. It started with a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger. A woman came in for Sunday brunch. 60s. Church clothes. The kind of careful, pressed appearance that speaks of weekly rituals and community reputation. Phyllis seated her. I came by with the coffee carafe on my usual loop of the floor, and the woman looked at me the way people sometimes look when they're searching for someone in your face. When I leaned to refill her cup, she said my name like a question. Corinne. Corinne Hadley. My stomach fell afloor. I confirmed it. She said she knew my mother, that they'd sung in the same choir for years. She said it warmly, like she was presenting a gift, her voice full of the comfortable kindness of someone who has never questioned whether their kindness is wanted. Then she said the thing that turned the morning cold. She said it was such a shame. What happened? The way I'd run off so young. How it had broken my poor mother's heart. That even now, all these years later, my mother still asked the congregation to pray for her wayward daughter. To pray she'd someday find her way home. The woman patted my hand. She genuinely thought she was being kind. I stood there in the middle of my diner, holding a coffee pot in a restaurant I had built from nothing, 3 hours and 20 years from that gravel lot. And I understood in one cold, clear moment that the lie was not dead. It had a whole life of its own back home. It had a choir. It had prayers. It had a grieving mother at the center of it, performing her loss in front of people who had only ever heard one side. And that grieving mother was the woman who had cracked a car window and told the dark to keep me. I poured the coffee. My hand didn't shake. I don't let it. But something old woke up in my chest that morning. Something I had boxed as carefully as Vera had taped that tin. The story was alive. And if the story was alive, the people telling it were going to want their ending eventually. 9 days later, the first call came. Phyllis took the message while I was on the line. She handed me the slip with a look I couldn't read. A woman had called. Left a number. Left a single sentence. Tell her it's her sister Renata. Tell her it's important. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in 20 years. My sister Renata was 5 years older than me. The responsible one. The one my parents trusted to keep me in line on that drive home from the wedding, which is a detail that matters more than I understood at 14. I waited 2 days before calling back. When I did, Renata's voice came on smooth and carefully rehearsed. The voice of a woman who had practiced this in her car. She said how wonderful it was to hear me. She said the family had thought of me every single day. She said that life was short and family was family and that whatever happened in the past should stay in the past. Notice what she did not say. She did not say the word station. She did not say we left you. She did not say I'm sorry. She talked for 4 full minutes about healing and forgiveness and the importance of moving on. And she never once named the specific thing that needed forgiving. I've run a floor for years. I know when a customer is circling toward a complaint they haven't said yet. I know the shape of a person building toward an ask. So I let her run through it and then I asked her plainly, what did she actually want? A pause on the line. The real kind. The kind that tells you the prepared speech just ran out. She said our father's kidneys were failing. Dialysis 3 times a week. A transplant list years long. The doctors had made clear that a living donor match from a blood relative was his best remaining hope. She let that sit. She did not, on that first call, explicitly ask me to give my father a kidney. She was too careful for that. She just made sure I understood the shape of the need, the clock, the fact that blood was the only thing that could fill it. After we hung up, I sat in Vera's chair by the window for a long time. I felt a lot of things in that hour. But the clearest was this. This was not a family that had spent 20 years quietly regretting what they'd done and finally found the courage to reach out. This was a family that had run out of options and remembered they had a spare daughter. The prayers. The choir. The wayward girl story. The congregation petition. All of it had been the public performance. The private reality was a man on dialysis and a list of relatives whose blood had already been tested. I was not a daughter coming home. I was a possible organ. And the worst part, the part that sat coldest in my chest, was that some small buried corner of me, that 14-year-old standing on gravel still waiting for the tail lights to circle back, still wanted to matter to them enough to say yes. That was the corner I did not trust. That was the corner I needed to protect. I want to tell you exactly what I did next, because the easy thing would have been to close the door and never answer another call. But I'm not a person who makes decisions blind. I sat with it for a week. I asked myself the hard question. If my father was truly dying, Did 20 years of silence and hurt mean I should let him die without even looking at the facts clearly? I didn't have a clean answer. What I had instead was a colder, steadier instinct. The one Vera had spent years trying to teach me to trust. Before I let a single one of these people near the life I'd built, I needed to know exactly what was true. Not their version. Not my 14-year-old memory, which they'd spent 2 decades insisting I'd gotten wrong. The actual record. The paper. I'd spent my entire adult life trusting documents over people. A signed contract kept its word when no one else would. Now that belief had somewhere specific to go. There was a report from that night. A deputy's signature. A social worker's case file. A woman named Ellen Marsh who'd handed me a business card at 14 and said, "It's your record." I'd kept that card in the same drawer for 20 years like a fuse I'd never lit. If they were going to come at me with the wayward daughter story in front of a room full of people, I was not going to argue from memory and feeling. I was going to argue from the file. So I went upstairs. I reached behind the good dishes. I took down the tin box. The tape split under my thumbnail with a small dry sound. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs asked me to. Inside, on top, was a folded train ticket stub. My train ticket stub. The return portion, from a train I'd never been allowed to take home. I have no memory of giving it to Vera. She must have quietly lifted it from my coat that first week when I was too numb to notice, and she had kept it for 20 years. Under the stub was a business card, soft at the corners from age. Ellen Marsh, County Family Services. A case number written on the back in pencil. Vera had kept that too. And beneath both of those, a single sheet of lined paper folded twice. My name on the outside in Vera's slanted hand. I almost couldn't open it. When I did, it was short. Vera was never a woman of many words. She wrote that she'd loved me like the daughter the good Lord never sent her. She wrote that she'd kept every scrap, the ticket, the card, all of it, because she'd watched too many people get talked out of their own lives by folks who could lie with a straight face. And then she wrote the line I will carry the rest of my life. Keep the proof, honey. People lie. Paper doesn't. I sat on that kitchen floor and I cried for the first time about any of it. Not for the family that left me. For the woman who stayed and saw me clearly enough to arm me for a day she knew was coming but didn't live to see. Then I dried my face, picked up the card, and made a call I should have made years before. Ellen Marsh had retired. But the county office hadn't gone anywhere. And neither had my file. You have the right to your own records. A person can request the case file that was built about her life. A person can request a copy of the police report that named her as the subject. I called a lawyer named Frances first, because that's how I do things. She walked me through every form, every agency, every correct procedure, and told me to keep copies of everything I sent. I filed the requests. I paid the small copying fees. I wrote my diner's address on the return line. The address of the place I'd built, 3 hours and 20 years from where the story started. And then I did the hardest thing a fiercely self-reliant person can do. I waited. I worked my shifts. Refilled the coffees. Kept the bell over the door ringing. And 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a thick manila envelope with a county seal arrived in the mail. I waited until after close to open it. I sat in the back corner booth with the lights dimmed and the chairs turned up on the tables and I opened the envelope with a butter knife. The police welfare check report came first. Reading it was strange. Like reading about a stranger I happened to have been. There was the date. The time, 9:40 at night. The station's name. Harold, the ticket agent, listed as the reporting party. The deputy's name and badge number. A clear, official summary of what a 14-year-old had told her in a vinyl booth. It matched my memory exactly. And then I reached the line. The responding officer made multiple attempts to contact the minor's parents by phone. She left a message identifying herself and stating that their daughter was in county custody pending parental response. The parents did not return contact that night. A follow-up entry, dated several days later. When reached, the parents declined to return for the minor and stated the child had chosen to leave the home. Declined to return for the minor. In a deputy's handwriting. In a county file. With a date and a badge number and a signature. Not my memory. Not my feeling. The record. I set the report aside and opened the CPS file. Found Ellen Marsh's intake notes. Found the sentence she had written because my mother said it to her face. The phrase about me running off ungrateful, documented in a social worker's case file, in the language of official record. The lie and the truth. In the same envelope. In the county's own hand. I sat there a long while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter. Something heavier. Something like being seen, 20 years late, by the only two witnesses who had thought to write it all down. The pressure from my family escalated fast once they sensed I wasn't going to come running. Renata called twice more, her warmth thinning each time like a solution being diluted. Then texts started arriving from a number I didn't recognize, because my mother had gotten herself a new phone for the purpose. Her messages read like Sunday sermons, full of scripture about honoring parents and the shortness of life and the mercy God extends to those who soften their hearts. Not one word mentioned a train station. Then a harder one the next day, the careful script beginning to slip. She wrote that she had raised me better than to abandon family in their hour of need. I read that sentence 3 times. Abandon family. From her. Renata tried a different approach. She said she'd hate for things to become unpleasant. She said the family was prepared to come in person if I continued to ignore them. She said it like a courtesy. She meant it like a warning. Here is the thing about a threat issued to a woman who has already survived the worst version of you. It doesn't land the way you hope. I texted Renata back. Short and plain. If they wanted to talk, they could come to the diner on a Sunday in broad daylight and we would talk in front of everyone. I meant it as a boundary. She read it as a victory. We were both about to find out which of us was right. I didn't choose the diner on a Sunday by accident. I chose it because it was mine and because it was full. For 20 years, my family had told their version of events in rooms I wasn't in, to people who had never heard mine. The choir, the neighbors, the prayer chain. It all happened on their ground, in their light, with their audience. And I had never been present to put a single fact on the table. If they wanted to come at me again, they were going to do it on my floor, in my light, surrounded by people who knew me as the woman who had built this place one shift at a time. Not as a story someone had told. I made 2 photocopies. The police report. The relevant page of the CPS file. Just 2 sheets. I put them in a plain folder. I told Phyllis that some family I wasn't close to might be coming in on Sunday, that I'd handle it myself, and that I might need her nearby. Phyllis, who had done 2 combat tours and didn't rattle, simply nodded and said she'd keep the coffee coming and her eyes open. That was all I needed. My ground. My witnesses. My proof. And 20 years of practice staying level when someone tried to tell me I didn't happen the way I happened. The week before that Sunday, I looked around the diner with new eyes. Marcus at the flat top, who had come through every crisis alongside me without flinching. Phyllis running her floor like she'd been born to it, knowing every regular's name and how they took their eggs. Earl at the counter with his black coffee and his newspaper. The Harmon family in their standing Sunday booth with their 4 kids coloring on paper placemats. The night shift nurses who came in for breakfast on their way to sleep. None of these people shared my blood. Every single one had chosen, day after day, to keep coming back. My parents never understood that about what I'd built. The lesson my mother intended to teach was that I couldn't survive without them. What I'd actually learned was how to build something so steady that other people found their way to it. I built the exact opposite of a gravel lot. I built a place nobody got driven away from. Sunday came up the way storms come up the coast. Slow and then all at once. I slept badly Saturday night. But when morning arrived, I wasn't afraid. I was something better than fearless. I was ready. Renata didn't wait for Sunday. She came Saturday afternoon, alone. Scouts go ahead of armies. The bell rang just after the lunch rush when I was wiping down the counter. A woman in her late 30s walked in and stopped just inside the door. I knew her the moment I saw her, even across 20 years, even with all that time written across her face. She had our mother's mouth and our father's way of not quite meeting your eyes directly. She looked around the room, the full, bright, humming room I'd made. And I watched something flicker across her face before she caught it and put it away. It looked a lot like surprise. Maybe something close to shame. She had expected, I think, to find me struggling. The story they'd been telling required me to be struggling. A wayward girl who ran off ungrateful was supposed to have a small, difficult life. Not 160 covers on a Saturday and her name on the deed. I poured her a coffee she hadn't ordered and sat across from her, because I'm a host before I'm anything else. She talked for a while about how wonderful the place looked, how she'd always known I was resourceful. She circled and talked and circled some more. And then, for just one moment, the circling stopped. She looked right at me and said, "Cor, you really did all this yourself?" It wasn't quite a question. In that single breath, I saw the sister I might have had. The one who knew exactly what had been done, who had spent 20 years carrying the weight of not saying so. Then the breath ended. She blinked, and the script came back up behind her eyes. She said the family just wanted to put the past behind them. The past. Like it was a place we'd all left together, rather than a lot she and our parents had driven away from and left me standing in. I asked her to say it plainly, whatever she'd driven all this way to ask. I told her she could ask it directly, because I was a grown woman and I could handle plain. So she did. She said our father needed a kidney. She said the family had all been tested and no one was a match. She said the list was years long. She said a sibling was the best remaining hope. She said it like she was offering me an opportunity. And then she said the line that decided everything. She said, "After everything, Cor, this is the one thing you could do for family." After everything. I held that phrase in the air between us and felt the full weight of it pointing in the wrong direction. Renata must have seen something close down in my face, because she reached for the oldest tool in the kit. She said it gently, like she was reminding me of a shared fact. "I know things were hard. And I know you ran off. But you can't punish a dying man for the choices you made as a kid. You ran off. 20 years later. Sitting in the diner I'd built from a station lot. My own sister, to my face. Either she believed it, or she'd decided to believe it, because the alternative meant looking at what she'd watched happen, what she'd helped build into a story, and who she'd been while the truth waited in a county file. I didn't correct her. Not there. Not alone with no witnesses, where it would be her word against mine all over again. I told her I'd give them my answer in person the next day. At the diner. With everyone present. Renata smiled the smile of someone who thinks they've already won. She had no idea she'd just confirmed exactly which lie I'd be bringing the receipts for. After she left, Phyllis came over and refilled my coffee without being asked. That's her way of asking if you're all right. I told her the short version. These were the parents who had left me at a train station at 14. They were here now because they needed something from my body. Phyllis didn't flinch. She'd seen enough of the world to know it could be exactly that cold. She set down the pot and said, quiet and direct, "What do you need from me?" I told her the truth. I needed her to do nothing. I needed her to let it unfold in the open, to keep the room comfortable, to trust that I had it handled. She understood that better than I expected. She said, "Sometimes the bravest thing is to let people see the truth land." I sat with that all evening. The temptation was cruelty. To throw them out before they could perform. To say the sharpest true thing I could find and let the room hear it roar. But cruelty had always been my mother's tool, dressed up as righteousness. I was not going to beat her by becoming a version of her. I was going to beat it by being exactly what they'd told the choir I wasn't. Steady. Decent. Right. With the paper to prove it. Before I slept, I drove to where Vera is buried on the hill behind the church. The small, old one on the edge of town that had nothing to do with my family's congregation. I brought her no flowers. Vera thought cut flowers were a waste of money you could spend feeding someone. I stood in the grass in the evening quiet and I told her everything. I told her I'd opened the box. I told her about the train ticket stub and the card and her letter. I told her about the kidney request and the choir story and the Sunday coming. I told her what I intended to do, and more importantly, what I intended not to do. I wasn't going to destroy my family. I had the means to be cruel and I was not going to use them. I wasn't going to make my father's illness a weapon. I was going to do one thing. I was going to put the truth on the table in front of the people who'd been lied to, and let it sit there. Keep the proof, Honey, people lie. Paper doesn't. Standing on that hill, I finally understood the second half of that sentence. Paper doesn't lie. But it doesn't gloat either. It just sits there, being true. That was all I needed to be. I drove home the long way, windows down. The dark came up on both sides of the road and it didn't scare me at all. Sunday opened bright and full, the way the good ones do. By 11 o'clock, the brunch rush was in full swing. Earl at the counter. The Harmon kids coloring. The night nurses laughing over French toast. Marcus at the flat top like a machine. Phyllis everywhere at once. I worked the floor the same as every Sunday, because the worst thing I could do was look like a woman bracing for something. I wanted the room exactly as it always was. Real. Alive. Mine. The bell rang 100 times that morning. And then, in the early afternoon, it rang once more. I looked up. There they were. My father came first, smaller than the man I remembered from childhood. Gray. Careful on his feet. Visibly sick in the way dialysis makes a person look like the body is conserving everything it has. My mother was behind him in her church coat, chin raised, scanning the room the way she'd always scanned a congregation. Performing her entrance. Taking stock of her audience. Renata brought up the rear, eyes moving quickly, the only one who looked nervous. The three of them stopped just inside the door, and for a single suspended moment, nobody moved. 20 years collapsed into the space of that threshold. The last time I had seen my mother's face, it had been framed in a car window, telling the dark to keep me. Now here it was in my doorway, performing warmth for a room full of strangers. I set down my coffee pot, wiped my hands on my apron, walked across my own floor to meet them. My mother went to work on the room before I even reached her. That is a skill and I won't pretend otherwise. She opened her arms and said my name like a hymn, loud enough to carry to the nearest 3 tables. Corinne. Oh, my Corinne. She told the room what this was. A daughter not seen in 20 years. A day of healing. The Lord's goodness on display. She reached for me and I let her embrace me, because making a scene in the doorway would only feed her version. She squeezed me theatrically. She dabbed at dry eyes. A few regulars softened the way decent people do when they witness what looks like a reunion. My father hung back, looking at the floor, then at me, then at the floor again. Renata stood off to one side, the expression of a person who has lit a fuse and just realized she misjudged the length. My mother kept narrating. She said she'd prayed for this day. She said all that mattered was family. And then, smooth as anything, with the front half of the diner half listening, she got to the real point, dressed in the language of love. She said, "And now your father needs us, baby. Now's our chance to be the family God intended." Hand on her heart. Voice low and trembling at just the right frequency. I watched 2 tables of decent people begin to nod. She was good. She had always been good. I poured coffee. I asked them to sit. I guided them to the large corner booth, the one with a clear sightline to the counter, where Earl and the nurses and most of the room could see and hear without any effort. On purpose. I poured 4 cups. Sat down across from them. Let the room settle back into its noise for a moment. My mother kept talking. Told me how wonderful the place looked. How she'd always known I had it in me. She was rewriting the past in real time, constructing a history in which she had believed in me all along, in which everything had simply been a misunderstanding, in which we were a family that had drifted apart and now were finding our way back. I let her finish. Then I set my cup down, and I said, in the quiet, carrying voice I'd developed from years of running a floor in a loud room, "Before we talk about Dad, and before we talk about family, I think we should agree on what actually happened at the station." The word landed like a dropped tray. My mother's smile stayed, but her eyes went flat. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You ran off. We were heartbroken." She said it for the room as much as for me. Renata looked at her coffee. My father looked at me, and something moved in his face. Something that wasn't performance. I kept my voice steady. "I understand that's the story you told. And I've carried a different one for 20 years, mostly to no one, because it was always my word against yours, and yours came with a choir." I paused. "But here's what you should know. It was never just my word. I reached down and placed the plain folder on the table between the coffee cups. I opened it slowly, turned the first sheet so it faced them. The police welfare check report. County seal at the top. Date. Time. 9:40 in the evening. I didn't wave it. I didn't hold it up for the room to see. I simply set it on the table between us, the way you set down a contract when there is nothing left to argue about. And then I read it aloud. Flat and clear. No heat. No performance. The way you read a recipe. The date. The station name. The ticket agent listed as the reporting party. The deputy's name and badge number. The summary of what a 14-year-old had reported in a vinyl booth. And then the line. The responding officer made multiple attempts to contact the minor's parents by phone. A message was left stating that their daughter was in county custody pending their response. The parents did not return contact that night. I set the second sheet beside it. The CPS file page. My mother's own words, documented on the day she spoke them to a social worker's face. I read them back to her. The diner had gone quiet in our corner. The kind of quiet that spreads outward through a room like a ripple. I looked at my mother. And I said the only thing that morning that I had to be careful not to feel too satisfied saying. Because it wasn't cruelty. It was hers. Return to the person who'd made it. I said, you told me to find my own way home. A pause. I did. I looked around the room I'd built. This is it. You're sitting in it. My mother broke the way a frozen pipe breaks. All at once and loud. She shoved the report off the table. It fluttered to the floor. Her voice climbed out of the church register into something raw I hadn't heard since the car window. How dare you? You ungrateful, hateful girl. You always did this. You always made yourself the victim. You twisted a misunderstanding into a tragedy just to punish people who loved you. She was on her feet. Her coat slipping off one shoulder. The warm mother performance gone like it had never existed. Every person in that diner was listening. Not pretending not to. Earl had set his newspaper down. The nurses were watching with the still, professional attention of women who've seen people reveal themselves under pressure. The thing about performing calm goodness is that it works until someone applies pressure. And then the real face emerges. And every person in that room watches it happen. My mother gave them the real face. She called me a liar over a document with a county seal, while a deputy's signature sat 3 feet away. And every regular in that diner watched her do it. Renata had her hand over her mouth. My father, who had not spoken a single word, slowly bent down, picked the fallen report up off the floor, and read it. I watched him read the line. I watched 20 years move across his face. He did not defend her. He did not say I'd misremembered. He did not perform anything. He just held the paper and went very, very still, while my mother stood over the table calling me dramatic, calling me ungrateful, calling me every version of the girl she'd turned me into in the story she'd spent 20 years telling. And the room she'd come to charm watched her become the very thing she'd called me. I let her run out of air. You cannot argue someone out of a tantrum. You can only outlast it. When the silence finally came, I gave them my answer. Calm. Final. I said no. I said I would not be tested and I would not donate and I would not be reconsidered. And I said why. Plainly. So that no one in that room could rewrite it later. These people drove away from a 14-year-old girl. They were told that same night she was alone, and they chose not to come back. You don't get to abandon a child, spend 20 years telling everyone she's the one who left, and then show up needing her body. I said it without heat, which made it land harder than shouting ever could. Then I did the cleanest thing I have done in my entire adult life. I said the door was closed, and it would stay closed. That this was not a punishment. It was a boundary. There is a difference. I told them I hoped my father would find a match, truly, and that if he wanted I would write down the name of a strong transplant program because wishing him well cost me nothing, and carrying his illness as a weapon would cost me everything I'd built. And then my father finally spoke. He looked up from the report. His voice cracked under the weight of what he was about to say. I should have turned around. A single sentence. 20 years late. But true. And I think it cost him more than the kidney ever would have. I nodded at him. Because a true thing deserves a nod. Because I am not made of stone. But I didn't take it back. A real apology doesn't undo a thing. It only means the person finally sees it. I let him have those words. They were his to keep. Then I stood up. I walked to the front door and held it open. The way I hold it for any customer leaving. Polite. Steady. No performance in it anywhere. My mother swept past me, murmuring about ingratitude to a room that had stopped believing her. Renata paused in the doorway, right in front of me, and for 1 second I thought she was going to say it. The true thing. The I'm sorry I should have said at 14 when I watched you get out of that car. She didn't have it in her. She just said my name once, soft. Then followed our mother out. My father went last. He set the report down gently on the tabletop like it was fragile, which I suppose it was. He met my eyes. He didn't perform anything at all. He just left. The bell above the door rang once. And they were gone. 3 shapes moving into the bright Sunday afternoon. 3 tail lights pulling away. And this time, I was the one who stayed put. In my own warm, full, chosen place. The room didn't snap straight back to normal immediately. Rooms don't, after something true happens in them. Earl gave me a small nod over his coffee cup. One of the nurses caught my eye and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded back that I was. Phyllis came over and squeezed my shoulder once, firmly, and went back to her tables. Nobody made a fuss. Which was the kindest thing they could have done. But I knew, and they knew, that the wayward daughter story had just died in the only town where it might have followed me. It had no choir here. It had witnesses now. Weeks later, a letter came from Renata. 3 careful paragraphs that still couldn't locate the word sorry. Only, I hope you understand. We did what we thought was best. I read it once. Placed it in the same drawer where Ellen Marsh's card had waited 20 years. Not as a wound. As a record. Because I keep the proof now. All of it. I never heard whether my father found a match. I made my peace with not knowing. Wishing him well from a distance turned out to be exactly as far as my love could safely travel. And that was enough. The diner kept humming. Marcus made his pies. Phyllis ran her floor. Earl drank his black coffee at the counter every morning. The bell rang and rang. And one quiet Tuesday afternoon, I took the train ticket stub and Ellen Marsh's soft-cornered card, and I had them framed together behind glass. 2 small pieces of the night a girl did everything right, and a woman spent 20 years saving the proof. I hung them on the wall beside the register, where I see them every single day. Not to relive it. To remember that the truth survived. That a frightened 14-year-old did the right things in the dark. That a kind woman who owed her nothing saved every scrap she thought might matter someday. That between the 2 of them, together, they outlasted a lie with a whole choir behind it. People ask me about that little frame sometimes. Curious regulars. New faces. I tell them it's a long story about finding your way home. Then I pour them a coffee in the home I built in the town that kept me, and I get back to work. Which is the most honest, most hard one, most real happy ending I know how to offer. If someone ever drives off and tells you to find your own way home, believe them. Then go find it. And build it so solid, so true, so undeniably yours, that on the day they come looking for something from you, the door already belongs to you. That's where I'll leave you. In the warm middle of a place built from a gravel lot. From a tin box. From a woman who saved a train ticket and wrote 6 words on a folded piece of paper. Keep the proof, honey. People lie. Paper doesn't. And a boundary doesn't owe anyone an apology. By the way, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below, because it genuinely moves me to see how far stories like this one travel. You never know who needs to hear it today. If this reached something in you, share it with one person who might need it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.